Okay, good evening everybody. Thanks for coming along to today's planning applications meeting. If we can move straight on to the agenda. Item number 1 is the evacuation procedure. We're not planning any fire drills today, so if the alarms go off we'll treat them for real, and if we can evacuate the building through both doors of the chamber, down the stairs, out the front door and meet across the road by the Yorkshire Bank. If anybody needs any help in getting out, give us a shout, we'll make sure that happens. It's also a good time to remind people to either switch off your mobile phones or to put them onto silent, and just to let people know that pretty much all of our meetings, as today, are filmed and recorded and put out on YouTube at a later date, normally a couple of days after the meeting. Item number 2 is to receive apologies for absence. None? And item number 3 is to confirm the minutes of the meeting, which was on the 12th of June. You happy that I sign those? Great, that? Thank you. Item 4 is to receive any declarations of disclosable pecuniary and other interests in accordance with the Members' Code of Conduct. None. Item 5 are declarations of contact. If any members have been contacted by anybody in relation to the applications today? No. Councillor Gran.
Thank you, Chair. Some time ago I attended a presentation held by the applicants for item number 1, which was a public event, so I met the applicants then, and I also met residents who had views on the matter, but I didn't give any indication on which way I would vote on the matter.
Okay, thank you. Item number 6 are applications where the public indicated a desire to speak. If I just run through that for those that haven't been here before, is the officer will present the report. Following on from that, I'll take the speakers that are listed on our agenda. In line with the Constitution, you get 3 minutes to speak. I'll be strict on that. Once the egg timer goes off, I will stop you from speaking. That's just so it's fair to everybody else, that they get the same amount of time. However, at that point, members may want to seek any points of clarification. It's only to clarify anything that you may have said during your 3 minutes. Again, after that, officers may or may not want to come back in at that point. And then, before we debate the item, somebody will have to move something and get that seconded before the debate can take place. We normally reach a decision on the day. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes things are deferred for site visits or extra information, but in most cases we make a decision on the day. Okay, yeah. Okay, that takes us on to item number 1 then, which is Hill Farm, Church Lane, Exhall. Claire?
This application is for the change of use from agricultural land to a horse and pony sanctuary. As members will see from the agenda, there have been 18 letters of support, plus 1 from the Exhall Residents Association. Some of the points raised include that the horse sanctuary will support the local community, support animals needing protection, make use of the green belt, and will be a better use than employment as allocated in the emerging borough plan. The application is simply for the principle of the change of use of the land. The applicant has submitted a supporting document to confirm that a future application would be submitted to address any highways concerns, and that in the interim that the land would purely support 10 animals with a tractor delivery once a week. Once the animals were put on the site, they would not be moved until the further application had been successful for the details of building provisions, vehicular access, visitor access, and the operation of the site for the community benefit. The site is within the Greenbelt. Policy ENV1 of the current local plan states that development will not normally be permitted in the Greenbelt unless it is for certain things, which are agriculture and forestry, essential facilities for outdoor sport and outdoor recreation, for cemeteries, and for other uses of land which preserve the openness of the Greenbelt and which do not conflict with the purposes of including land within it. Limited extensions, alteration or replacement of existing dwellings, and limited infilling or redevelopment of major existing developed sites, which are already identified in adopted local plans. The National Planning Policy Framework also states that the construction of new buildings in the Greenbelt is inappropriate except in certain circumstances. The proposal in its current form does not fit with any of the acceptable uses and is therefore inappropriate development. It has also not been demonstrated that the extent of buildings proposed that are required in order for the land to be used as a sanctuary can be done without harm to the Greenbelt. Officers therefore consider that the proposed development would cause harm to the Greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness. The NPPF states that inappropriate development in the Greenbelt should not be approved unless very special circumstances can be demonstrated, which would outweigh the potential harm to the Greenbelt. In this case, no very special circumstances have been put forward by the applicant. Officers therefore consider that the proposal is contrary to Greenbelt policy. In relation to highway safety, County Highways have objected as they have concerns with the current vehicular access that will be reused for the proposal. They consider that the access needs widening, the existing gates setting back, and that visibility displays are not in accordance with guidance, and that pedestrian visitors to the site also need to be considered. The applicant has confirmed that these objections would be dealt with in a future application. However, Highways have stated that the existing application still needs to be able to demonstrate that the access, including visibility displays, is suitable in order to address highway safety issues. Officers therefore consider that it has not been demonstrated that the proposed scheme will not have a detrimental impact on highway safety. The recommendation is therefore refusal, as detailed on the agenda.
Okay, thanks Claire. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here as advocate on behalf of the residents of our ward, which adjoins the development. So I'm speaking on behalf of the residents of Exhall and Ash Green that contacted me about this. I have to say I've had a number of comments about it. The overwhelming view of those residents is that this proposal is actually to be welcomed rather than reviewed. This is being vastly preferable to some of the alternative uses that have been put forward for this site in recent years, and that the amount of extra traffic that will be generated on nearby roads would in fact be minimal. The points that have been made to me are that the introduction to this application is in fact incorrect. It mentions the footpath B21 as running right through the middle of the site. It doesn't. It runs alongside the site at the bottom of the embankment of the M6, not actually through the site. If you look at the definitive map of Warwickshire County Council, that actually confirms that to be the case. The planning history of this site shows that in the past the councillors approved use of this site for a transport museum, for residential developments and other things. So it seems odd now that somebody who wants to bring back derelict buildings, and it's been a long time derelict, is we're using the NPPF and Greenbelt protection to stop something like this, where in fact we've been quite amenable to allowing it to go through when it's been a different type of development that we perhaps wanted to see. So I would really argue then that the change of use to a horse sanctuary doesn't really contravene the NPPF Power 88 because it's bringing back a brownfield site into use. That the grazing of horses technically falls within agricultural use. It's riding horses on a site that comes under equestrian use that would require a change of use. So we're into sort of quasi-agricultural use, if you like, rather than a strict agricultural equestrian use here. And that use of this site would be, in some ways, recreational. The people that go to see the horses would be recreational visitors. The people who help out at the site would be helping out for recreational purposes. It's not a commercial riding school, it's not a commercial business in that sort of sense. And clearly, it's not industrial units either. I think it's the well-being of the community. It's something that people want to see, and importantly, it preserves the open aspect of the green belt. You know, it's the sort of thing that if people associate horses with the countryside, they associate it with open spaces. And then we've mentioned traffic on this site. I mean, anybody that's familiar with Western Lawns knows the amount of traffic that generates. That's a much bigger operation. Good.
Thank you. Are there any points of clarification? No? Claire, anything you want to come back on? In that case, to enable debate to take place...
Councillor Evans wants to speak on that.
You what?
There's a little list of extras he came in.
Oh, I do apologise, I didn't see the extra one. Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've come to this committee this evening to speak in favour of the application this evening. I echo everything that Councillor Brown has said so far. The Council states in this document on page 16 that one of the reasons for the refusal is because it's within the green belt, but the NPPF, as it states on page 16, says unless it's for agriculture, forestry or essential facilities for outdoor sports and outdoor recreation. Well, in my opinion, this would be a recreational facility, and I suppose Councillor Brown said it was also some of the agriculture and forestry one as well. So I too went to the opening day. It was at the ex-old school, and there was a lot of residents there who came along, and I was really amazed actually by some of the positive things that this organisation has done at one of their other sites just outside of Liverpool. Particularly, it's done quite a lot with disabled children. So I really do think this would have a positive impact on our local community if it was granted permission. Also on page 16, it says another reason for refusal. As with previous Greenbelt policy, inappropriate development is by definition harmful to Greenbelt. But actually, would this really be an inappropriate development if it provides such a positive impact on our local community? I don't think it would have a massive impact on local residents, particularly highways. I don't think it would cause any problems whatsoever. So I would ask all members of this committee this evening to actually grant permission this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any points of clarification? No? Claire? Right, any more speakers? We haven't, have we? In that case, to enable debate to take place, can I move the recommendation which is to refuse planning permission? Is that seconded? Thank you. Any member? No? In that case, Councillor Beaumont.
Sorry to be late with that, Chairman. I did arrive at the meeting late, but I have noticed that two speakers have not made reference to the highways objection. And I just wondered if the officers could explain how, given the highways object, you could have found yourself in support of the proposal.
Well, the application is recommended for refusal on two grounds, on the impact on the green belt and on highway safety.
Yeah.
Highways don't consider at the moment that the access is suitable and further works would need to be done to make it suitable, and the applicant hasn't demonstrated any of those things, which is hence the reason for refusal.
Councillor Wilson.
Just going on about that, if the committee were minded to approve, I'm not saying it would, I'm still listening to the argument here, but I've read in the paperwork and you mentioned that the applicant was on about restricting it to 10 horses and 1 tractor per day, and that they were on about bringing a further planning application. Could those be conditioned in the approval that before that they would be limited to 10 horses and the 1 tractor in the interim, and that a further, and then I'm just thinking this out loud because you'll know more about conditions than I do, and then condition later on about if it was to expand, another planning application would have to come forward to satisfy the highway requirements. Because I know that we do things and stagger them with larger planning applications, because if I'm honest, I don't think really this is any worse than some of the other applications we have permitted in the Green Belt with special circumstances. For example, gypsy and traveller accommodation. I'm sure some people would say this is more appropriate than approving those types of applications. It's all subjective. But I'm wondering whether that would be possible to condition if the committee were minded to go the other way.
You can start.
I think it would be possible to condition the number of horses on the site and the deliveries once a week, for example. I don't think we could control them submitting a further application to us. Now, I think it would depend on the nature of the works that highways would require, whether or not those works themselves could be covered by a condition. What do you think? I think it'd be quite difficult, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think the slide actually says the other thing that I would have added, that the County Council are also concerned about pedestrian visitors to the site and the existing access. So even if you restricted the numbers of, say, horses on the site and 1 tractor delivery a week, it would be difficult to restrict numbers of pedestrians that went there, worked there or visited there. And that was part of what the County Council were concerned about.
Councillor Grant.
It's certainly bizarre that officers often recommend things for approval that's damaging to the community and then recommend things for being refused that would be very good for the community. When was the last time we had an application that had 18 people saying that they're in favour of it and nobody objecting? This doesn't happen very often. We had a good number of people at the meeting that I attended, out talking to people, canvassing, just asking for their opinions. Not saying anything myself, just saying I'm impartial at this point, I just want to hear what you think. I've not heard one person say that they're against this, which is unheard of, really. And I just think this would be a great use of some existing derelict buildings. And we've lost enough in the Bedworth sort of Heath area and the Exhall area in recent years. We could potentially lose the Cross Keys very soon with the current appeal. So it's about time we added something new to the area and that we had something that we could be proud of locally. I think that most people would rather see something compassionate that helps animals, that makes people interested in horses, equestrian, the equestrian industry. And I think we should support this. And if the county council officers are really that concerned about 10 horse vehicles using the roads, then I just don't see how they can approve hundreds of HGVs using the roads. Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be a bit more simpler than what it actually has ended up being, because having lived in this area for a great number of years, this has been a site of some contention over those years. And this seemed to be a practical way of trying to deal with the situation. I've got, this is on record, but I actually agree with Councillor Wilson, which is, I'll probably be the first and last time. But there's, the question is that if there was you see, the way I'm looking at it, there's a possibility there could be a better thing done with this, a better plan done for this site. And that's my concern, is if we throw this plan out just now, if we throw it out, give it permission just now, and then highways, the county highways come in and say you can't do this because that and the other, I'm not going to preempt an appeal against it, but that's a possibility it could happen in the not too distant future. So is there no possibility of trying to get some sort of, I'm not going to say adjournment or suspension or something along those lines, for a better plan put in its place in order to deal with the concerns mainly from highways, the county highways department?
With the applicant on both reasons for refusal, actually, the Greenbelt reason and the highways access, and suggested to them that they might want to consider holding the application in abeyance until we were much clearer on the future of the site in the local plan. Because if the allocation for employment use goes forward in the plan and the plan's adopted, then the site will be taken out of the Greenbelt, so that would actually take away that reason for refusal. Also, that allocation would actually improve the highway network, which would probably also take away the highways reason for refusal, but the applicant has requested that the committee determine the application in advance of that. So it is at their request that the application's here before you. We have a great deal of sympathy with the use, but the case law is, and the MPPF and planning legislation says, that use of the land for horses isn't agriculture, and it's a separate use which needs to be considered against the Greenbelt policy. And so that's what we're doing, and that's why it's recommended for refusal on that grounds. And we have a highways objection, which is why it's recommended for refusal on that. So we have tried to work with the applicant for both of those things, either for them to go away and come back with a plan of what they would like to put on the site, and see if they can work up a highway solution just using this site, regardless of whatever else happens to the rest of the allegation. And they requested that the application be considered by committee.
Thank you. Councillor, now I'm going to get this wrong. Councillor Sargent.
No.
50-50, I know I get it wrong. Okay, Councillor Llewellyn-Nash.
Confused as to how horses and greenfield sites don't go together. If you're going to build a stable, where are you going to build it? In the middle of an industrial estate? In the middle of a highway? No, you're not. You're going to build it on greenfield site. Stables are 1 story high, they are not a block on the landscape. I pass this actual area 2 or 3 times a week. It's got a proper sort of the wide gates that farm tractors would normally go in. I've seen dog walkers actually use the pathway that you're talking about that runs alongside. They cross the road and use that pathway. As for the derelict buildings, I would imagine that they've been derelict for 30 to 40 years. Access isn't easy at the moment. Why? Because it's all overgrown. The trees and everything have actually sort of almost suffocating the entrance, but that is easily dealt with. I believe the people who live opposite, on the other side of the road, the people in Tudor Court, would actually like this to happen. You've got, it's funny, isn't it? You've got converted barns on the opposite side of the road, and yet the council is saying that they don't want horses and stables on Greenbelt. I'm failing to understand that whole thing. Also, I do believe that this particular charity not only work with children with special needs, but they also work with soldiers suffering from PSD. It has been noted that horses and mental health actually go together, and they've proven that soldiers have actually, it's helped them in their journey through their PSD, and they've seen this. Children with special needs, you know, all the time on TV we see children's special needs horses. The two go together. I fail to understand why this. We're even having this meeting, you know, to say that this needs to go ahead for the community, for our service men and women, and for children with special needs.
Done. I'll add my own name down. So I think a lot of what's been said, I wouldn't argue with about the principle of doing it. But from what I've heard and what I can see, it's not only the reasons are given within the planning agenda, they've been explained on a couple more occasions. And certainly one of the main aspects of the training that we've already received or should have received is in relation to have a proper reasons for doing the opposite to what the officer's advice is. And I do remember applications on this site before, and I do remember us granting permission for them. But I think I'm right in thinking that at that time the county highways didn't object. Now, I don't know the reasons why something's changed from those years ago to now. I guess people that are on the county council that are in this room today should be asking the county council. But if we went against our officer advice here and it went to appeal, likely chances are if that appeal was won we'd be hit with some costs because of it. And therefore, whilst there's lots of things probably in its favour, the two reasons for refusal I think are difficult to overcome. So therefore the recommendation is in front of us, which is to refuse planning permission for the reasons as printed. All those in favour of that? And against? And abstentions? It's not refused. Councillor Grant.
We recommend approval due to the very specific, unique and special circumstances of the use of land for a charitable cause that helps people with post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, mental health issues, and a unique place in the community, and also overwhelming public support for this in the community.
Are they reasons?
Yeah, I just have to remind you that planning permission goes with the land and not just with a particular owner unless you give it personal permission.
But you're happy with those reasons?
Mm-hmm.
They seconded.
The conditions.
Have you got those noted?
With the conditions that you mentioned earlier.
Can you just remind us what they are, please?
I heard the limiting of the numbers of horses on the site and the limiting of numbers of vehicular deliveries or visits to the site, which will presumably we can do with a management plan or something. So with those specific conditions.
Anybody want to speak to it? No? Okay, then it's been moved and seconded approval for those special circumstances and those conditions that have been added to it. All those in favour of that? And against? And abstentions? Okay, that's approved then, thank you. Oh, sorry, Clay. Okay, item number 2, the retreat, 62 George Street, Bedworth.
This application is for works to trees covered by 2 tree preservation orders which apply to the retreat, 62 George Street, Ringway. The property, which includes a bungalow and a commercial building, is just outside Bedworth town centre and is opposite Tesco. The site is between the neighbouring residential properties of Linden Lee and dwellings on Leicester Road. One objection from a neighbouring property has been received, which raises points including that the works aren't required, the trees provide an enhancement to the area, and that they are used by birds and bats for roosting and nesting. The works proposed are removal of epicumbic growth and pollarding of T1 to T5, which are common lime trees, which are located there. T7 to T9, which are also common lime trees, located up here, and T11, which is a Lawson cypress. Pollarding will be back to the previous pruning points of around 3 metres, and the work is proposed to be repeated every 2 to 5 years to retain crown shape. The applicant has submitted a supporting letter with the application. This states that there are concerns about falling limbs, and an arborist has noted that the tree has previously been pollarded before 1975, prior to the applicant purchasing the land. The arborist also points out that there are signs of weakness in the trees and advises that the trees should be pollarded back to the original crown. The arborist report submitted with the application claims that the trees are in fair overall condition and all have signs of previous pollarding and epicumbic basal growth. The report states that T5 also has some dead branches. The report concludes that the previous maintenance has now produced weak attachments of branches to the original trunk and states that this could result in limb failure. The report recommends that the previous historical maintenance recommencing by pollarding back to the previous pruning points as soon as possible. TPOs are normally placed on trees for their public amenity value, their size, form and type of tree. These trees can be seen from George Street Ringway, and it is considered that they do have good amenity value. Whilst the council cannot insist on maintenance of trees covered by an order, the National Planning Practice Guidance states that councils should encourage good tree management. The council's parks team have no objection to the initial work and for the same work to be carried out as future maintenance every 2 to 5 years. Rather than the applicant having to apply every time the work is required, the council are happy that the routine maintenance is covered in perpetuity under this application as per the advice in the National Planning Practice Guidance. The recommendation is therefore approval, subject to conditions as detailed on the agenda. Thank you.
Mr. Corrigan. Thank you. You can press the big button on the at the bottom. Yeah, it should light up. Press it. The big button.
Well, I think that was very comprehensive. There's not really much that I can add to that from the notes that I've made, except perhaps to explain why the branches can become weak. And that is that when you pollard a tree, chop the tree off, chop the branch off, you chop it through the heartwood. When the new branch grows, it grows from the sapwood behind that. And so as it gets larger, it doesn't knit in with the original. And so you get a weaker joint between the two. That apparently is why they can fall off. And the same applies also to an extension to the trunk. And some of the extensions are 10 metres or so long. There are about 7 properties close enough to the trees that could be damaged in the event of a fall, and obviously that they need to be made safe to avoid any damage to property, injury or even worse. I discovered the other week that I do have a legal obligation to prevent the loss of light to premises in Lindenley. That was something my sister get back from me for 40 odd years. And so they can demand some, the trees form a very big sun shield and stop the light getting in. 21 years ago, the rector of Bedworth asked for the trees to be removed, and obviously we couldn't do it with the TPOs on. But 21 years ago, they were a nuisance to him, and the growth has increased considerably since then. I would be quite happy to replace them with other trees and to plant a dozen or more trees, something like silver birch, which could be allowed to grow to a mature height without the same danger of falling branches and providing this massive sunshade. If you agree to the pollarding, then we would like to get that work done fairly quickly, starting this autumn and finishing possibly in February, starting at the top end and working our way down. That's all I think I can add.
Okay, thank you. Are there any points of clarification? Councillor Grant. You just put your mic off, please.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Corrigan. I think we spoke on the phone before, but not actually in person, so nice to meet you in person as well. Quite often I deliver down here whenever the gates open anyway. So, yeah, it's just nice to see such, unique trees, and they're quite good old trees as well. And I can understand completely where people on Lindenley are coming from when they say they want them cut back to some extent. I think the main objections that I have heard about have just been worrying that the extent of how it's been done could damage the trees in some way. You seem conscientious enough to be able to assure that doesn't happen, which I'm quite happy.
Councillor Grant, these are meant to be asking points of clarification. You can have.
Yes, I was coming round.
Councillor Grant, Councillor Grant. I'm in the chair. If you can listen to me for one moment. It's about points of clarification. You can do your speech.
I know you've had a big loss today,
you can
so I'm sorry for your...
You can do your speech when it comes to that. If you want to ask a point of clarification...
Which I was trying to do before I was interrupted.
No, it wasn't. You were doing a speech.
Yes, the point of clarification, when you were talking about the silver birch trees that you offered to put in, wasn't that refused according to this? And I was just wondering what the reasons were, because it didn't seem to be sufficient enough in this.
I understand. The question was...
Do you know what the reasons were for the refusal of the application to put in the silver birch trees? I don't know if the notes here are clear enough.
I'm sorry, I do apologise.
It was a question in relation to why that permission was refused. Is that correct?
Yes.
No, I didn't. No, okay.
We've planted a number of silver birches in 8, 9, 10. They've grown extremely well, which is why I suggest using those. But we didn't need permission to plant them.
No. Okay, thank you.
And they haven't replaced trees with TPO, so again, that's
okay.
Into it.
Thank you. Are there any other points of clarification? Mr. Poynton, if you... If you can, please, unless you don't want.
I must start by saying thank you to the planning department for giving me the chance to speak at this meeting. My garden looks directly onto the trees. I live in Leicester Road, which are around 6 yards from my perimeter wall. The council did not send me a consultation letter, and I only saw by chance a notice pinned to a "To Let" sign at the property's entrance. The council did apologise, but I found out very late about the proposal, which put me at a disadvantage. The council must be applauded for not allowing the trees to be removed and for inferior trees to be planted in their place. cutting the trees 3 metres in height. Correct me if this detail is wrong. That is right, isn't it? 3 metres in height is what you want to cut them to. Yeah. Right. Will reduce the trees to mere stumps and make a complete mockery of the tree preservation orders. I'm not up to scratch on tree preservation orders, but in the past I know that they were a good insurance and gave the tree a good surety of protection. For a tree to be cut, it had to be being old and frail, diseased or in a dangerous state. These trees are none of these, and from a bit of homework they seem to be 50 to 60 years old, a very young age for such magnificent common lime trees. What I deduce to be the problem is that the applicants are tired of the leaf litter that ensues in the autumn months. We get thousands of leaves from these trees ourselves in the autumn, but clear them up and put up with it because of the beauty that they provide, not only in the summer but all year round. Bedworth Town Centre doesn't have many large trees, and these limes provide a home for many species of birds and insects. Trees are planted on George Street Ringway as well, and there are 25 of them between the proposed trees and the Oakwood Gardens Older People's Complex. At this site they are being incorporated into the gardens and they look magnificent. As well as being aesthetically pleasing, the trees also contribute to easing traffic pollution by providing green lungs and also act by minimising traffic noise from the busy George Street Ringway. I think all the trees should be protected, but the 5 behind my premises are the ones that I can directly talk about on this planning application. I've always just taken them for granted, but now there is a chance of losing them. I felt it was imperative to come and stick up for them. If you were talking about a slight crown reduction, I think I could live with it, but it seems that wanton destruction is on the way. There are reasonably priced gardeners out there who would gladly clear the leaves for a sensible price. I do not know if there has been a site visit or there is to be one, but I urge the planning committee to visit to fully understand the destruction that pollarding would do to these trees.
Thank you, Mr. Poynton. Sorry, I do have to stop you there. Okay. Are there any points of clarification? No? Claire, anything to come back on? No? Okay then, to enable debate to take place, can I move the recommendation, so the works as described to the trees on the agenda? Is that seconded? Thank you. Any member? Councillor Grant?
Question. With regards to the trees, I understand that certain trees will have bigger issues than others, and Mr. Corrigan went into details with what was wrong with the trees. Would it be possible for, because this is only a planning permission, for any trees that only need to be pruned, and any ones that need to be completely pollarded to be completely pollarded, is sort of a halfway house that satisfies people on Linden Lee and preserves the trees to the greatest extent they can be preserved?
Permission, we're dealing with the application that we put forward, which doesn't include all the trees covered by the tree preservation order anyway, so it's only the ones that require the works, and as Claire has already said, the Parks Department do agree that the works are required.
The consent, if it's given, only applies to that description of development. Okay. Any other member? No, in which case the recommendation to grant consent has been moved and seconded. All those in favour of that? That's unanimous. Thank you.
What does that mean then?
It means the consent has been given for those works described on the application, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we can move on to item number 3, 288 Tuttle Hill.
This application is for works to a tree covered by a tree preservation order behind number 288 Tuttle Hill. Number 288 is a fairly recent new build of a row of detached and semi-detached dwellings with a vehicular access to the rear. So the new houses are along here. The existing houses along the hedgerow are here. The tree is beyond the rear of number 288 and between 288 and the rear gardens of the dwellings within the hedgerows. The tree is one of a row of trees covered by the tree preservation order. The tree the application refers to is one of the largest in the row of trees. The works proposed are a 30% crown reduction and removal of ivy to T6, which is a sycamore tree. Justification for the works are that the applicant had complained that the tree provided excessive shade and caused a problem with leaf litter and the seeds self-setting in the applicant's lawn. Also that the tree was larger than the neighbouring trees, so it would bring it back in line with those. 2 letters of objection have been received, raising points including that the tree provides privacy and security and is used by nesting birds and is in good health. TPOs are normally placed on trees for their public amenity value, their size, form and type of tree. The Council's Parks team advised that the Council's adopted tree strategy states that trees should not be pruned because of leaf litter, seeding or shading, as there is no right to light use unless the planting of the tree causes loss of light to a house. They also consider that the fact that the tree is larger than the others is not a justification for its reduction. However, National Planning Practice Guidance does state that it may be appropriate to grant consent for works, even if an authority believes there is no particular arboricultural need for the works. Parks have confirmed that a 30% reduction in the crown would be acceptable on this occasion. Therefore, as there is no objection from Parks, officers consider it would be unreasonable to refuse the works. The recommendation is therefore approval, subject to conditions as detailed on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Once again, to enable debate to take place, can I move the recommendation, which is to grant consent to the works? Is that seconded? Thank you. Any member? Oh, right, okay. Any member? No? If not, the recommendation is to grant consent to the works with the conditions printed. All those in favour of that? Thank you, that's unanimous. We don't have any other items, so thank you very much for your attendance and declare the meeting closed.